We want you to learn from leaders in the field, stay inspired, and help you make learning stick for everyone. Welcome to Unleashed Learning TV. So we've got a special guest today on Unleashed Learning TV and Unleashed Learning Radio, especially if you're committed to being an inclusive educator. Now, Dora Dome is here, and she's practiced education law for over 25 years, primarily in the areas of student issues and special education, and she's written numerous books, including Improving Student Achievement Through the Creation of Relationships, A Critical Race Theory Counterstory, and her latest book, Student Speech and Expression in Public Schools, a resource guide for K-12 schools. Now, she's going to help us all understand what's critical race theory and help us continue to find ways to make learning stick for everyone. I really think this is a not to be missed episode. So, Dora, welcome to Unleashed Learning TV.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's nice to see you and nice to chat with you.
I wish we could be in person, but we're in different countries and we're still locked down here in Sydney. But as you know, what we do at Unleashed Learning is we help businesses and schools and organizations and teams help make learning stick for everyone. And the everyone, we mean everyone. And what we do with that is part of this, we've got to have lenses to look at who everyone is if we want to make learning stick for everyone. And so also what's happening is critical race theory, we're getting a lot of educators asking us about critical race theory because it's kind of in the ethos right now. And so I thought this is the perfect episode to interview you because of your background, your work, what you've been writing about, what you do. And I think you're going to help the audience and myself a lot to reach more people. So welcome.
Well, thank you.
So I thought we'd start with like a bigger question about what is theory. So to understand critical race theory, you probably need to know what is theory. So how do you define theory?
Yeah, for me, theory is really just, it's how you look at things. It's those guiding principles that either help you explain or understand an analysis, right? So it's not the facts themselves, but it's like how we think about the facts.
How we think of it. It's almost like how we see it. So it helps us how we see it, and then it makes us understand what we're seeing, how we
exactly
think about it.
Exactly.
Okay, so that helps start, because I don't know if some of the questions people have asked us is, what does theory even mean? And
Sure.
So if we're going to talk about critical race theory, can you help us understand what is it? What's critical race theory?
So critical race theory is a reaction to legal formalism. So, really the origins, right? It's a reaction to, law and how law is written, how it's interpreted, and in the sense that law is neutral, right? And that it's objective. And so kind of, critical legal studies, which was kind of the one of the theories that critical race theory kind of relied on and kind of developing, really says, law isn't neutral, law isn't objective. And so, it's having this lens of really looking and examining law originally, and now just kind of society around how does race play a role in the decisions that are made, the laws that are passed, the way things are enforced, or the way things are interpreted. And so, critical race theory is really about kind of taking away or going beyond this notion that it's neutral, that it's objective, and really kind of recognizing the role that politics, that economics, that power plays in kind of the way things play out.
Makes me think of bell hooks, who said education's never politically neutral. It either confirms or questions the culture. And you're saying that law is not neutral, right? It's not just facts. There's history behind it. There's reasons behind it. So critical race theory gives us a lens to see what's going on in these spaces, in these bigger conversations.
Right. It's a way to think about it. It's a way to talk about it using common language and kind of having some shared understanding.
Now, don't we need more shared understanding and common language? So that's why we love talking. Okay, so I want to ask you what you allude to, but what does critical race theory ask us to do as, in this case, educators or leaders or trainers or presenters or anybody who's facilitating, learning? What do you think it's asking us to do or think about?
The way I think about it is it's asking us to consider context. right? It's asking us to look at the things that are happening in the context within which they're happening, not in a vacuum, right? So to understand that, laws that existed, 100 years ago, they existed in context. Those same laws don't exist now because the context has changed. And so what is it about the context that has changed that has allowed laws to change, or policies to change, or practices to change, right? So for me, I think it really is about context, right? And if I could, I mean, I actually, in kind of thinking about this, I was reading an article in the New York, I think it was the New York Times, and there were two quotes that I really liked. So can I share them with you?
Yeah, please. I want to do. Yes.
All right. So one of them was by Kimberly Crenshaw, right? So she's one of the original kind of, brain trust around like kind of critical race theory. And she talks about, she described critical race theory as it's a way of seeing, attending to, accounting for, tracing, and analyzing the ways that race is produced, the ways that racial inequality is facilitated, and the ways that our history has created these inequalities that now can be almost effortlessly reproduced until we attend to the existence of these inequalities. So again, that looking at that context. And then the other quote that I really liked was by Professor Mari Matsuda, who is another kind of one of those original thinkers around critical race theory. And she says, for me, critical race theory is a method that takes the lived experience of racism seriously, using history and social reality to explain how racism operates in American law and culture, toward the end of eliminating the harmful effects of racism and bringing about a just and healthy world for all, right? So really, for me, it's about what is the context. We cannot, it's like learning facts without the context that those facts exist in.
It also, if I can add, I love its purpose for is to make things better, more equitable, more just, it's used for, that's when I'm listening to that, so I can see it and then make things a little bit better, and also not reproduce what is being reproduced.
Exactly. Like, don't make the same mistakes, right? Like, let's learn from this. So if we just say, for instance, we talk about, like slavery. Slavery existed. Slavery is a fact, right? But if we don't look at the context of why slavery even came into existence, right? Like, without that, how do you ever understand slavery? How do you understand Reconstruction? How do you understand Jim Crow? How do you know what I mean? So you need to understand the context to understand why things are happening the way they are happening, because again, they don't happen in a vacuum. You got to understand that there is a reason why these things are happening. And when our education system in particular does not address the context, I think they're doing a disservice, and they're also they're kind of minimizing the importance and the significance of the event, right? When you don't really consider the context of why it exists.
I keep just thinking, I shouldn't say just thinking, I'm thinking a lot. What it makes me think about it again, as I wear glasses, it's like looking through lenses to see what's happening here. And looking through lenses, I think about some of our programs we run, and educators look through their resources and really have some languages to think about what these resources are communicating or not communicating, or who they're communicating for. So it gives us lens, and then you're also adding the historical lens for why that might be the case.
Right. Absolutely.
So how can it be applied? So could you give us maybe like a concrete example of how we could apply this, or what it looks like applying critical race theory in something?
Yeah, I don't think of it as in terms of application. I think of it again as a way of understanding, right? So I'll give you two examples. I'll give you kind of an older example and then a modern day example. So an older example would be like the desegregation of hospitals, right? And it's interesting because I actually learned about this through the 1619 project, which was amazing. So I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it, or if your viewers haven't seen it, but it's just, the podcasts are phenomenal. But anyway, so one of the episodes that they talk about the desegregation of hospitals. And so they talk about, just some of the inequities, right, that were happening. Like there was a man that was rushed to a white hospital, and he looked white. They took him in, they began surgery. His family showed up, and his family were Black. And at that point, that's when they realized that this man was not white. And they stopped the surgery mid-surgery. And they said, we're not doing this. He needs to go to the colored hospital. And the man died in transit to the colored hospital. So, and then obviously quality of facilities, all that stuff. So anyway, there's a Black doctor who was like advocating for decades, literally decades, to desegregate hospitals, to, improve the care for Black folks in particular, but also accessibility, in terms of the types of hospital. And he got pushed back and was like, no, it's not possible. Can't do it. So then the US Congress passes Medicare. Mm-hmm. So now, if you want to be able to get paid through Medicare, you have to follow the non-discrimination civil rights statute, right? So all of a sudden, after literally decades of not being able to desegregate, the hospitals desegregated, I believe, in less than 4 months.
Wow.
Right? And so critical race theory, this is the tenet of interest convergence. It's that again, it's a way of looking at this. So if you just take those facts and you say they couldn't desegregate or they wouldn't desegregate, Medicaid passes or Medicare passes, and all of a sudden they're able to desegregate in 3 months because they want that money. So critical race theory says, okay, interest convergence, and interest convergence is the idea that the benefits for people of color won't happen unless there's an articulable benefit to white people or the people in power, right? So at the point at which they were going to have access to this huge pot of money, it became in their interest to basically extend this benefit to people of color, desegregate the hospitals, make them more accessible. And so critical race theory is really a way of understanding why this happened when it happened, why it didn't happen 2 decades before, why it happened after the passage of the Civil Rights Act and in response to the creation of Medicare, right? So it's a way of understanding. A present day example for me would be like the Capitol riots, right? So, here, certainly, anyone who was paying attention to that, saw the commentary, and one of the most common commentary was, if those were Black folks or people of color, they would have just killed them, right? There's no way they would have been able to breach the Capitol, go through the Capitol, go through people's offices, right? And so again, critical race theory is a way to kind of understand the context of that and of that action and examine it. And so, another tenet is whiteness as property, and this idea that there is a benefit to being white. There's a privilege. There's an entitlement, really a tie to being white. You would never see a group of Black people storming the Capitol because they know that they would be killed. Right? I mean, that's just the fact. So there's this entitlement in the white population, certainly the people who were part of that riot, right? Who knew that they weren't going to be harmed. They knew that they were going to be able to do this. And yeah, there may be some consequences, but nothing like what would have happened if they had been people of color, right? And so whiteness is property, or even the permanence of racism, the idea that, racism is kind of an integral part of our society, and the fact that, again, white people could be part of this, Capitol riot, do the things that they did, and turn around and walk away and go home, and nothing happens to them. So those are 2 examples, and there's hundreds of thousands of them, millions, of examples of kind of how critical race theory can be used, right, is a way of really, again, understanding that contextual analysis about why did this happen? Why were these people able to get away with that, right?
I could just unpack. My brain is going crazy, and of course, there's pushback to this because why would people want to not see this, right? So there's a pushback to having these conversations, and it makes me think also, most of the work that we do, most of the programs we run, always starts with ourselves, always starts with our histories, always looks at the patterns, always looks at the harder conversations before we start thinking about how we could be of service to others, because we got to know, and these are lenses to look at this stuff. And so they're uncomfortable at times, and they need to be uncomfortable at times so we can make it less uncomfortable now for more.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, less uncomfortable for more. And maybe uncomfortable is too tame of a term, but that's the term I'll just use for the second. What's a misperception? What's the misperceptions of critical race theory? Now we're limited time. We probably could spend an hour, but what are some
Yes,
misperceptions?
I mean, so again, in preparation for this, I mean, I read this stuff anyway, but I just took some notes. So, Governor DeSantis in Florida, he's had a few gems, right? CRT is teaching kids to hate each other. It's state sanctioned racism. It's, and this idea that to talk about racism is racist in itself, right? So, and really the misconceptions is that like we're teaching kids to hate white kids or teaching white kids to hate themselves, and again, CRT isn't a bunch of facts. CRT is a theoretical framework. It's a way to look at the facts. It's a way to understand, and so I think that, and it's also interesting because, the pushback that is happening around CRT in particular, they're focusing on CRT. But again, if you think of it as a framework, there's lat crits, there's queer crits, there's, CRT is just a theory. It's a theoretical framework to understand and think about the kind of the contextual analysis of our history, right? And so, for me, the misperception is that, again, that we're teaching something, CRT is in itself something separate from the history. And it's not, it's a way of understanding and talking about the history.
I remember a professor in university, and we would read a text, and then he would, I think it was a he would say, okay, let's do a feminist perspective. Now, what do you see? Let's look through race. What do you see now? Let's do economics. What do you see now? And you would see it, you'd see it and just go, wow, I see it totally. Who's writing it? Why would that person write it? What's it mean if they're writing it? What if it means that this, and it didn't mean someone was bad or good, or that's like, oh, I see it now. And then we can have a conversation. And
absolutely. And the need to understand different perspectives, right? And, Kimberly Crenshaw also talks about intersectionality, right? So it's not even just one perspective, a Black woman's perspective is different than a Black male's perspective or a white woman's perspective, right? It's like, just understanding that the lens through which you're viewing it is going to shape how you see it.
I think it's powerful. I think it's exciting. We're just about out of time, but I do want to ask you, as educators, people working to make learning stick for everyone in our trainings and our presentations in our classrooms, the folks that we work with, the folks that watch Unleashed on TV, they want to make a difference. So I want to know, how can we use critical race theory in the ways we work to make learning stick for everyone? So how can we use it?
Sure. So I'm going to go back to that contextual analysis, right? I think, when you can teach and learn in context, that it just is so much more powerful. Again, we can, you can teach kids, or you can try to teach kids a bunch of facts, right? Here's a date here, here's a date here, here's a, but without the context, they're not going to remember it. They're going to memorize it as long as they need to memorize it in order to complete the task, right? But if you teach them the context within which these events are occurring, right, then you're creating a possibility that it is going to stick, right? So if you teach about whatever you're teaching, and you teach about the social conditions that contributed to it, or the power relationships that were involved in the development of this, or how this rule came about and how it gets enforced, and why it gets enforced this way, like, that's powerful, right? Because that is true learning. That is true kind of understanding. And you kind of get away from the rote learning of information without context. Like, I think it's impossible really to learn without context.
It makes me think then what we're really making stick is not the fact, it's the lens. Because I think learners then start seeing, I know that's what it's done for me, is it gives another lens. So what's sticking is they may forget the fact, but they'll remember the lens. And once you learn the lens, you see the world totally differently.
Yes,
you probably
absolutely.
see yourself differently. You see colleagues and friends differently, and hopefully it works to make things better for people.
Right. Right. You have different perspectives, and you understand that there are varying perspectives, and they're all legitimate, right? Based on, how you come to the table. And so really being able to stay in that space, right? And be able to examine things from using these various lenses, I think is a way to ensure that learning sticks.
For everyone. I mean, really, I think that's for everybody. Dora, every time I talk to you, I'm with these conversations for weeks afterwards. For years we've been talking. So I really appreciate the time. I hope the audience, I'm sure they're going to be thinking, the kind of the same ways. It lasts forever. So thank you for the work you do. Thank you for the time. I'm honored that you continue to share the conversations with me. I keep learning and thinking about it and hopefully using it in ways that helps people.
Well, and thank you for having me. I mean, and thank you for the work that you do and continuing to kind of put out there, just your perspective and different perspectives about how do we do this better? Because again, we're all in this together, right? So if we can figure out how to continue to learn and grow and just come together, like that's awesome.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dora. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
So as you know, some of the best conversations take place after the episode, so we'd love to hear from you. So our question is this: what lens did this interview cause you to look through, and how will you use that lens to continue to make learning stick for everyone? So jump over to our website and add your comments, and while you're there, grab our new free ebook, which is going to help you make learning stick during this post-COVID teaching period.